And welcome everybody into the Mind Sculptors. I'm your host Callahan, and we've got a great roster of co-hosts for today's show. But before we get to that, just a reminder to make sure you go and check us out on Patreon. There are two different tiers at the moment where you can subscribe, get access to our Discord server, and also, if we get enough in that tier, a production credit in the credits. But with that, it is my pleasure to welcome back to the show Cobblepott. How are you doing today?
Doing well. How's it going?
Not too bad. Really glad to have you back. And also returning is Pongo. Pongo, how's it going?
Doing well.
Awesome. And making his first appearance on the show is a good friend of ours from Into the North, is Spleenface. How's it going?
It's going great. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you in. So today we've been talking on Discord about, topics we want to talk about, all these sorts of things, and we've kind of all come together on this discussion of where are the three color combinations in Commander right now, because especially with the printing of Commander Legends, we have seen certainly an insurgence, I think is the word I'm looking for, of these three color decks that are built around some of these new partners that have come out. And obviously these color combinations these color, combinations, these color pairing's not the right word.
Wedges? Anyway, shards?
These combinations of colors. I was saying it correctly to begin with. I don't know. Anyway, they've always been around, and they've always come, like Abzan's always had like Anafenza and these different things. But now we're really coming to a point where we're seeing a lot more variety in these combinations. So we're going to kind of take a look and kind of survey where all of them are at right now. And so starting us off, speaking of Abzan, so Spleen is going to go ahead and talk to us a little bit about Abzan.
Okay. But before I do, I feel like I just have to object that these are in what appears to be alphabetical and not proper color order, but
they're actually not even in alphabetical order because we switched it around based on who's going to hold the baton for each of them. Just to make it more complicated.
I'm never coming on here again. Never mind.
So in no particular order.
So in no particular
order. Yeah, so Abzan is definitely a color that has like a pretty long history in cEDH. Like there was the old Boonweaver Carador decks. And then more recently, it's had kind of a dual nature. There's been like these very low to the ground, creature focused ad nause type strategies that we've seen. There's like a farm build with Tymna and usually Ikra. There's like the Tyam deck. I believe Lurker also made one of his Gave Brews was like the super fast ad nauseum powered deck. But then there's also been the evolution of what was Boonweaver Carador that became this sort of mid-rangey, not quite stacks, but definitely hate bears, heavy, creature-focused, like slower, not on the stack, often with like a reanimator element sort of archetype. Some people played like Anafenza in the Hulk days just because it was nice to have a Hulk 8-piece in the command zone. And then, people have played like things like Tymna, Sidar Kondo. And then there's also like you can build Gave like that. But yeah, it's got a lot of it's got like the tutors from Black. And then you have the creature synergies, with green, and then the black and green creature synergies that enables that sort of reanimate stuff. And then that pairs nicely with like the creature selection, and the access pairs very nicely with the hate bears from white, and you get your Abrupt Decay and Assassin's Trophy, so you do actually have access to like the very good generic removal.
Most importantly, though, you get access to Generous Gift.
Oh, right, yeah, and Beast Within. Oh my goodness, you're just
how could you forget
cooking
that?
with gas.
And Oblation.
Oh
Man, yeah, you use Oblation with the Thassa's Oracle trigger on the stack, right? That's the
Right. You never see it coming.
But yeah, so then you have like obviously when you're outside of blue, you lose out on counterspells, which are obviously a huge part of cEDH. And you lose out on a decent amount of the defensive counterspells by losing red. You don't have your SWAT, you don't have your blasts. Green has been getting a little bit more of that recently with, Destiny Spinner, Allosaurus Shepherd, and obviously Veil of Summer. But it's definitely not a color combination that plays super well on the stack. And most of the time you do have to win with some sort of permanent based combo, which means that you really struggle to win at instant speed, barring like exactly Hulk shenanigans.
Do you see Hulk as... I know that the Sick Robot is one of the last vestiges, I think, in the community of people that are, kind of holding on to still trying to make Hulk work, even outside of having access to Flash. Do you feel like Hulk still has a place in the metagame?
Absolutely.
Is worth noting.
I think that... So one of the big things that people... like that was pointed out, I didn't actually notice this when I first looked at Commander Legends, but oh man, I can't remember whose list it is, and I'm sorry for whoever came up with the idea that I can't credit you. But a Timna Halana deck, the green partner that whenever a creature enters, you can pay 2, and if you do, it fights something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Timna's obviously very strong in the command zone. And then Halana's actually, like, pretty decent as a control element. You can just be removing, like, people's problematic creatures just by playing your own creatures. Or, sorry, I don't think it's a fight. It's a punch. Like, it just deals damage equal to its
That creature
power.
deals
punch,
damage
yeah.
equal to its power to target creature.
Yeah. But also that means you have, like, it's not a great sack outlet in the command zone for Hulk, but it does let you, like, if you have that in play and you have the 2 mana, when the Hulk comes in, you can just have it deal damage equal to its power to itself, which means that you don't lose the consistency to the same degree, where, like, you always have to be finding your Viscera Seer or Carrion Feeder or, like, one of the artifact ones, because you have this, like, obviously subpar but still decent backup in the command zone as a sack outlet for Hulk. And then, like, your first trigger gets you a real sack outlet, and then you just go from there. So that's, like... I think that's... Whoa, sorry, Cobblepott, your video just went crazy. Yeah, that's, like, something that's kind of interesting, and it'll be interesting to see where people go with that. If maybe instead of Razaketh, people look into Hulk, especially because... right now, I think the stacks pieces that you really, really want to be running are Rule of Law type effects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which Razaketh... Obviously, you can sacrifice the creature ones to Razaketh, but you can't sacrifice literal Rule of Law to Razaketh, and it's often difficult to remove Deafening Silence.
Claws of Gix.
Yeah, so potentially
I used to run
that could be, like, a finisher to look into for, like, the more Hate Bear Reanimator type Abzan decks in the future.
Where do we think that the Abzan is positioned right now, kind of in the context of what the other lists are? And, I mean, we're going to start talking about the other color combinations here, but it's certainly not the fastest color combination based on, the type of win cons it has available to us. It seems like it wants to play kind of a grindier game because, really the best tools that it has for combating the metagame are going to be kind of hate bear oriented kind of things. And, it's going, rather than trying to outrun what the other what the other color combinations are going to be doing. It's going to look to try to bring everybody else down and break parity through whatever stacks pieces it's doing. Do we feel like it has the chops to be able to be the color combination that people choose moving forward?
So I think that it is one of the ones that's best positioned as an anti-meta color combination. I think that up until, say, the Flash ban, having red so you could play things like Pyroclasm was like one of the big sort of anti-meta strengths. But now I think the meta has shifted away from green and towards red, and away from creatures and towards artifacts. And Abzan is definitely a color that really doesn't need to be playing artifacts. Like, you have your creature acceleration, you're not trying to go super fast, so you're still obviously going to be running, like Crypt and Soul Ring and Diamond and Chrome probably, but you don't need to be running 2-mana rocks, you don't need to be running things like Lotus Petal.
Right. And if you don't have red, chances are you might also be looking at Collector Oof and Null Rod to be
exactly
able to
like and you're in like Abzan as a color combination. Like green and black is very good for supporting Collector Oof because you have access to just so many tools to actually find it and get it into play. And then white has a bunch of things that then you can layer on top, which will synergize well with sort of being anti-artifact and anti-storm. The one sort of downside is that your win condition is almost certainly going to involve the graveyard in some way, which means it might be hard to hate on specifically Underworld Breach. Though you could look at, there's a couple effects that primarily stop casting things from graveyards. Like I think Ashes of the Abhorrent is one.
Drannith as well. Gets you there.
Yeah, Drannith is already asymmetrical.
Right.
But yeah, like effects like that. Or one card that I've like been meaning to put in a deck at some point is Dryad Militant, which is the one that only exiles instants and sorceries.
Right.
Yeah.
As
always wanted
anti-breach
to play
tech,
that.
right?
Right.
Depending on how deep you want to go, although it's symmetrical, there is Kanoros, the Hound.
Is that one cast only? Does it stop reanimation?
I believe it also
reanimation.
stops reanimation.
Yeah, like,
symmetrically.
That's
kind of the issue.
Like, I think you don't want... Like, that's why I didn't, say you play Cage and Rest in Peace, right? Because you're probably reanimating either Hulk or Razaketh, or somehow... And Cage also, like, stops things coming in from the library, right? Which shuts off a lot of the green toolbox creature package.
Kanoros is one of those pieces that could see play in this color package under something that's more like kind of that bad farm. I mean, generally, Abzan is not going to be trying to outrace everybody, but it still can do. You have the bad farm build that's there, and kind of
I mean, it's
having.
I think that that's a build that I won't necessarily say will, because that's always hard to predict, but maybe should wane in popularity a little bit, because I like, you're just not getting the new tools for that archetype, right? Like, those tools are in red.
And we'll get to that too, because there's a particular farm build that I've been working on with red for farm. But and I think it's interesting because with all of this, and all that being said, Abzan, as far as these kind of mid-range strategies, really does feel like it is well positioned in its ability to hate on things, but also not perfectly positioned, if that makes any like it's in a good spot, but not great. Is kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I think that like we haven't found the right like mix of things that really stop what your opponents are doing but don't over interfere with you. Like, for example, my go-to card for this is Hushbringer, where it's like man, Hushbringer is actually like so, it shuts down Dockside, it shuts down Oracle, and like that's enough, honestly, for that card. But then it always interferes with whatever it is you're trying to do as well, and then that becomes a problem. And I think Abzan doesn't quite have the density of hate pieces it can run against the like Nosbreach Consult archetype that don't slow itself down too much.
Right.
Internal consistency seems like a problem.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, if you're like the one person playing a stacks deck and everyone else is playing Turbo Nos, like, they're going to remove your stacks pieces and then one of them's going to win. Right. So, like, there's no color that can sort of solo counter 3 other people on whatever archetype you're trying to fight.
It's worth mentioning, for Abzan as well, in particular, when it comes to hate bears, you kind of touched upon this a little bit earlier, Morgan, but a lot of the time you can, especially if they're creatures, you can run certain effects that can be disruptive to yourself with the intention of sacrificing them down the line to sort of unlock your own lines while disrupting people from theirs. So I think, in theory, that is an option that is available to certain Abzan commanders. It's not one that's obviously like widely available to every Abzan commander, because not every Abzan commander is going to be playing sack outlets. But if we take like Gave as a good example, or Gave is a sack outlet in the command zone. Historically, that's a deck that has played symmetrical stacks pieces that have interfered with its own game plan, with the intention of eventually sacrificing them to Gave himself.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So Gave is I'm sorry. It's one of those cards that has seen a lot of historical play. Do you see that as being something that you would expect to see at a contemporary table?
No, I not really. I think that it's like 5 meta commanders really either have to do something without having to put any additional resources into them, like Crom, where it's like you cast Crom and then he draws you cards, and you don't have to put mana into it or use it or build it to synergize with other cards, or they have to do just something like absolutely insane that you do actually have to put effort into. And I think Gave does something decent that you have to put effort into. And so, like, it's hard to justify, like, tapping, playing, like, the Jeweled Lotus into Gave on, like, turn 2 versus Jeweled Lotus into Crom on turn 2. Like, the Gave resolves and you're like, okay, now what? How am I taking advantage of this Gave? Whereas, like, the Crom resolves and you're like, alright, I'll start pressuring the Adnos player, and then this is going to be passively drawing me cards, and then I'm going to play the rest of my deck that isn't built to, like, support this. Right? This was just, like...
Right. It doesn't require any contingencies.
Yeah, it doesn't require any contingencies. It doesn't require you to have more pieces. And, yeah, like, Gave, more casual players think of Gave as, like, oh, the combo commander. But all of his combos are actually bad. If you're
not wrong.
If you go and actually look at what you have to do to combo with Gave, it involves running like there's like not that many cards that let you turn either the counters or the creatures into mana. So like they're all like these 2 cards plus the commander with a total cost of like 12 combos that like you don't actually like. Gave combos are not really competitively viable. Though, I feel like they might, seeing as they've done it many, many times in the past, I wouldn't put it past them to print some really good Gave combo pieces. Just possibly accidentally. Like, Cryptic Trilobite is a start, for sure. So we might get more in the future.
Yeah, Wizards does like printing things that do things when they die, or involve counters to some extent, particularly in Abzan colors. Every time they give something to Atraxa, a lot of the time that ends up being a Gave card as well. So totally, I look forward to potentially getting something that would theoretically break Gave in the future.
Yeah. Well, Abzan's one of my favorite colors, so if it does really well, I will be very happy about it. But on to my other new favorite color pairing. With the printing of Jessica, I have gotten really high on Mardu. And so Mardu is what we're going to be talking about next as we kind of explore these wedges. So Cobble, kind of give us an overview of what are the strengths, weaknesses, and what is Mardu really trying to do right now?
Okay, so similar to Abzan, Mardu is lacking blue. So that's just one of the first things to consider when you're looking at that color combination. You're not going to have the same type of stack-based interaction as the colors that are going to be playing in the blue side of the pool. But what it does have is it still has all of the black tutors is the main thing. So you're going to be able to reliably assemble whatever win con it is that you're looking to assemble. Being in black, it's also going to have strong support for recursion strategies, reanimation sort of strategies, which is also bolstered by the fact that it has red. So Underworld Breach is also going to dovetail well into that. You've got with white, you can put together, especially under the farm archetypes, you've got these low to the ground packages where you've got a lot of kind of low cost creatures which you can attack. A lot of them are life linking types of creatures that allow you to maintain kind of a buoyancy from a life point of view, so that you can profitably do your Adnaws or your big Necropotents or those types of things. In the Oktoberfest tournament, Bad Dog, who has run for years and years, has run a Kalia list that he's been kind of making faster and faster, where people for a long time never really gave a lot of respect to Kalia because it was always viewed as a very casual-oriented kind of slow-moving battlecruiser sort of deck. He turned a lot of heads when he made it to the final table with that, and it is playing in a lot of the same types of philosophies where you're keeping your life high, and then using things like Children of Corliss or other ways to create huge life swings that you can then convert into an enormous grip of cards. In that particular case, they're using like Villas. So he's, you reanimate Villas, get Villas into play, and then do a Plunge into Darkness or like a Fire Covenant or something like that, paying 35 life at instant speed to draw, so it winds up actually being, better,
a slightly cheaper Nas.
Right. So it's a Nas that actually draws you more cards and happens at a lower startup cost, and that kind of thing. So there's a bunch of different ways where Mardu allows you to kind of play either a very explosive, fast, low to the ground kind of turbo Nas type of game, or blend into that kind of a reanimator type of game that's also extremely explosive. You've got access to red, so you've got Dockside, and you've got Culling the Weak. You've got all of your ways of reanimating and recurring your Dockside in that sort of way. You got Razaketh, where you can. I don't know if people do it as often as they used to. Oh, I mean, sure, you've got Peer into the Abyss as well, but I still see people with Dockside Extortionist, Razaketh, and Corpse Dance, where you have a couple of the farm creatures that you had. You reanimate your Razaketh, and you go and get your Dockside, and you sacrifice the Dockside to go and get Corpse Dance. And then now, as long as you're making at least 5 treasures per loop, then you can assemble anything that you want and go infinite with your mana. And it's... I think that the updates that we've seen in Red over the past year, over the past 12 months in particular, where we've gotten, Jessica's Will, we've gotten all of the, the Dockside, Underworld Breach, all of the tools that have made Red much, much more explosive than it's been. It has really shifted a lot of the focus, where before, Black and Blue have always been really powerful, and Red for a long time has been something that was, kind of, set aside as not being strong enough to warrant being a color that people pursued. That has changed in the past 12 months, and people, are now making Mardu decks because of the power that just Red on its own is now bringing to the table. Now we couple that with Roger, who has now come onto the scene, who, speaking of being able to have this explosivity, this really low to the ground, really, really fast startup time, you got Roger now, so you can have, Springleaf Drum in your, Mox Amber, and, all of the things that we were talking about that you saw that were typical of farm decks that are now, able to be pulled off on turn 1 very reliably because he doesn't cost anything. Plus also having, the ability to have your free counter magic live on turn 1 very, very deterministically. It's gotten extremely compelling, and there's, you got Timna Bruce, which is your standard farm, but now we're seeing, Timna and Roger, we're seeing Timna and Jessica, we're seeing various, flavors of Kalia, and there's a lot of experimentation that's happening in this color combination, and I think that there's good reason for people to be here.
Timna Jessica, and I can say this from some experience playing that deck some, as far as the Mardu farm lists, in my opinion, is the way to go if you're going to be playing Mardu farm, because it lets you play. So the one downside I see of playing Roger in Mardu is that because the whole thing is right, it's really good in Grixis because of all the stuff Grixis has. In Mardu you lose a lot of that, and so now you have to come up with, how am I doing my win cons, how am I doing all these different things, and you kind of have to get creative with it, which is fine. But the nice thing with Jessica is you have the win con in the command zone. So you just have to be very singularly focused on, how do I create infinite mana? And that, or deal infinite damage of some sort, or deal enough to win the game. And it has more avenues to its game plan success than the Roger list does, in my opinion. Just because Timna out of the command zone, I don't know if you guys have watched this or not, but there was a game I was playing with that where, I had one of us down to 5 or something life after Sarah Ascendant Swings with Jessica, and then that makes your Nauses even better. So with me, I think Mardu was a color, in my estimation, that before the Commander Legends was fine. It wasn't great. Timna Bruise was a thing. Kalia was successful. But it didn't have anything super spectacular about it. I think now that you have Roger as a viable commander and you have Jessica as a viable commander, that opens up so many different avenues for what you can do in a more consistent fashion. And I think that just really puts Mardu is a lot better positioned now, in my opinion, than it was 3 months ago.
Yeah, I think these are all true points. As far as, looking at the color triad holistically goes, I look at sort of this core of black and red, the Rakdos core, and it kind of just, I would say, is a very strong combination to have for any kind of unfair strategy you want to be pursuing. Obviously, both of those colors tend to contribute a lot in terms of fast mana. Both of those colors, give you a lot of tools for explosiveness, whether it be through Dockside or, just Wheel of Fortune effects or, other rituals that both colors have, as well as tutors. If we look at particular commanders as examples, like Kalia, for instance, we're talking about a commander that does something that is actually like quite broken when you look at it at the surface, which is, theoretically it cheats on mana by a great deal. You can kind of look at Kalia as kind of like a ritual as well as protection, all rolled into one. If she's able to cheat in an 8-drop demon, that's quite good. It's like kind of like show and tell, or sneak attack, I should say.
Right. It's playing along the line of evading the people that are looking to disrupt ad nauseum, the people that are looking to disrupt kind of like the mainline ways that people get to victory, they're going to be holding a grip full of counter magic. And any way that you can get your win cons into play without needing to cast spells. I mean, we see this with Kenrith, we see this with, like you were saying, sneak attack or those sorts of things. Kalia being able to put Vilis or Razaketh into play without a cast reduces the surface area that people have for interacting with that happening. And so if Kalia was able to get onto the battlefield, now it's too late. They don't really have a lot of the interaction that they've got in abundance is now not going to be useful for them to overcome the game.
It depends what your follow-up after putting something like a Razaketh into play is, for example. You might end up having to expose yourself kind of in a similar way. But at the end of the day, if you end, if you don't make it there, but you kind of pass the turn with a Razaketh in play, then your recovery options are quite excellent in general. So, right. So you could do worse. You could do worse than having just a Razaketh in play. So there's that. If we look at some of the other commander options, we look at like Timna Bruce, for example, or Timna Jeska more recently. I think we're talking about something pretty similar here, where we are talking more or less about a Rakdos core, where, again, and I think you see it a little bit more here, you kind of get white filling in sort of the blanks, giving you a few additional tools that, you would need to, fill out the 99 with, or the 98 in this case, with acceptable power level type cards. And in addition, we've kind of we have this strategy that in many ways is propped up by Timna, and kind of like goes hand in hand with Timna, where you end up playing, again, we were talking about sort of these lifelink type attackers, small creatures that will get in for Timna, and in addition might also bolster your ad nos plans. So it ends up being like a pretty synergistic type 3-color combination if we're talking about specifically the Timna style decks.
Right. And as the just to say real quickly, as the free interaction suite has gotten better and better.
Yes.
The ability to have silence effects, the ability to have Grand Abolisher, and those sorts of things that are largely the purview of white, has become more valuable, I think, for being able to keep everybody else out of what it is that you're doing.
Right. And I think the white, final point here is white kind of is the rug that ties the room together in a lot of respects. Providing sort of those small creatures with lifelink to make your sort of long-term ad nauses better. Providing Timna almost specifically, but in addition, providing a lot of removal tools that red and black don't actually have access to, giving you options to beat the type of hate that would normally disrupt your strategies if you were in like pure Rakdos. For example, Rest in Peace is extremely inconvenient if you're playing black-red, perhaps a little bit less inconvenient now that we're in 2020, and for whatever reason, black gets to remove enchantments. But historically, enchantments being very inconvenient for Rakdos, and white, having some part to play in being able to deal with, that type of hate.
I will say before we move on that, in this discussion, I do think white in Mardu, I could make an argument that I do think that it is, if not more impactful, it is better served in this color pairing than I feel like it is in Abzan, where, black-green can work on its own just fine. It doesn't need white to really make it work. Sick Robots played Viral's Hulk to, some pretty good success recently. And, white and Mardu, in my opinion, is... I feel like it's more essential to the success of the game plan than it is in, any... like Abzan, for instance.
Well, I think the big thing is that a lot of the Tymna dongers in Mardu are white.
Right.
And you can run those in Abzan, but you can run dorks, which are have such a high utility case.
Right.
If you're on Tymna and Razaketh, and then dorks are actually just they're a triple threat in your deck. Their mana,
right,
their card draw, and their combo pieces all at the same time, and not running Hope of Girapur is a fine card, but it's not a card that you're stoked about running, which is why you never ever see it in 4, or very rarely see it in 4 or 5 color lists.
Right.
But you see dorks all the time in those lists because they having that however many you can run in your color combination, 5 or 6 1 mana accelerants that don't feed fish and don't feed dockside is actually huge.
Right.
And dovetails with Tymna and Razaketh very nicely in a way that Mardu has to look a little bit deeper and work a little bit harder to enable that.
Yeah, Mardu definitely has to kind of go all in the artifact acceleration avenue, right? Because it's you don't have green to ramp you up. How else are you getting there? I guess you can try relying on dockside, but I don't think that's very good, and that's definitely a weakness of it. Is it just kind of has to sit there and throw out artifacts in order to really play the game, which is fair.
If you are running those Hope of Girapurs and those Sarah Ascendants and those sorts of things, and you have Tymna as your commander, you are generating enough card advantage just off of those most of the time to be able to compensate in some way that you're seeing more cards and you have a better chance of hitting some of those other means that you have access to for acceleration.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think at their core, these are, almost mono black decks. They're very much doing sort of black things in terms of their strategy. A lot of reanimation, a lot of ritual effects, a lot of, abusing their tutors for consistency to actually, have a significant amount of depth as far as, the tools they have access to are concerned. Then, if we're looking at red and white as support colors, well, red is, I think, kind of making its way beyond just being a support color.
Red is getting really good.
Right. And
yeah. And then finally you've got white, where, white is kind of lending a few things here, but is definitely, I would say, largely we're leaning on Tymna here.
Certainly.
I think red's kind of in a weird spot because it still doesn't actually have a particularly high density of playables, but the ones it has are it's hard to call
bananas.
it a core. It's hard to call it a core color when I don't know how many red cards is Mad Farm running, right?
Right, it doesn't have a lot of depth as a color on its own.
Yeah, I don't know that I totally agree with that because Jessica Tymna, you're looking at 38% is black, 32% is red, and 30% is white. I mean, it's fairly even across the board.
Right.
I mean, what are you running? Like, what are you running that like ups the red? Is this pips or is this cards?
Pips specifically, but I mean like cards also. I mean, it's not that far off on cards. It's pretty even across the board.
Like I mean, so I'm looking at Mad Farm just because that's the fastest one I could pull up.
Right.
And it's running 12 red cards, which like is really not very many in a 100-card list. It's playing like 25 or so, 25, 26 black cards. But like obviously, you know, Breach and Dockside are like huge.
Right.
Yeah.
I think Jessica's Will is also going to be
Jessica's Will
is going to start being counted among
but, like,
those three.
what I was saying is that like,
Well, pips is like an incredibly misleading thing to look at too, because as soon as you have a card with 2 pips on it, you're essentially doubling your count. And white cards tend to have double pips.
Well, even looking
you have like
at
half as many cards.
So even looking at
white.
just the amount of cards, so there's 16 white cards, 19 white cards, 16 red cards. So I mean, and especially with the resurgence of cards like where we've seen Final Fortune really see a lot more play, just even in 5-color strategies. I just think red is significantly more well positioned in general. I don't think it's quite a core color; it's a solid 4th, but you know, I don't think it's. I don't think saying that white is just there as just filling is necessarily fair.
No, that wasn't what I was saying. I was saying that like when you're filling a deck, like when you put in like the last 10 cards of a deck are often not going to be like the red cards that you're reaching for. Like with green, you just fill it with like some creature synergy pieces. With blue, you just fill with like cantrips and counter spells. Where like it's very easy if you were given like a 90 card list and told fill this with blue cards, you would like not have an issue doing that. Whereas with red, you probably would. But like the red cards are so core to the deck that it feels weird to call it a support color, even if you're only playing like a very tight package of red cards.
Mm-hmm.
Like with white, I'm pretty comfortable calling it a support color in Mardu. Or in Abzan, for that matter. But, like, with red, it's like, okay, yes, you might be playing less of it than you are, say, the black cards, but then, like, can you really call the deck that has, like, or the color that has, like, Breach and Dockside, which are, like, your 2 primary enablers, like a support color?
Yeah, the red cards just tend to be so much more impactful.
Yeah, I guess maybe this is like a point that fits better in Grixis, where like the Grixis decks are hugely tilted towards blue and black, and yet the red cards are like still super critical. But it's
moving on to a deck that doesn't have red in it is the next kind of one in the Wedge circle is Sultai, and we Pongo and I discussed this a little bit in our tier list video. In episode, and we were being a little satirical in that episode, just a little bit. But you know, Pongo, just kind of go over for me what is Sultai at? Where is it at? You know, is it still kind of the best color combination as we had thought it was previously?
Right. So the Sultai Wedge / combination / triad / shard, whatever you want to call it. Don't say the last one.
Definitely don't want to call it a shard.
don't say pairing either. Yeah. So for a very long time, I would say in sort of recent cEDH history, and you know even a little bit before that, you know going back into like 2017, 2016, a lot of people would have definitely argued, I would say, wholeheartedly and with few reservations that Sultai was the best combination of colors you could possibly be in. Some of the strengths of Sultai are the fact that you've got, a high density of turn 1 acceleration, with mana dorks, if you choose to run them. If you're not playing, something a little bit more stormy, that might want to lean into rocks, or perhaps something that's going to, like run board wipes or something, because you also get access to those. Generally speaking, if you're playing green, though, you're playing these additional pieces of turn 1 acceleration, which, lend you a ton of stability to your mulligans. You have, as an additional bonus, very strong tutor support in black, as, any cEDH deck running black has. But in addition, if you're playing sort of creature-based strategies, you get tutors from green. And, most decks these days that are in blue, the third part of the Sultai triad, they're playing Thassa's Oracle. So you're playing at least one creature that you pretty much want every game, which kind of implies that, you can freely lean into those creature tutors and expect them to be good. So even if you're not really playing, quote unquote creature combos, you are playing a combo that involves a creature. So you get to play your things like Neoform, and, theoretically you can run stuff like your Eldritch Evolution, your Worldly Tutor as well. Going further, obviously in Sultai, you get access to a ton of card advantage, through black and through blue. Green also gives you some with Sylvan Library as well. Depending on what commanders you're playing, you might have additional sources of card advantage, but we'll get into that a little bit later down the line. Obviously, you have kind of what I think we can probably say you have the best interaction suite possible in Magic. Black-green giving you essentially the ability to destroy anything, and then you also have blue, which allows you to interact on the stack. So Sultai has all the tools, to deal with any threat. You also have bounce spells if you absolutely need those as well, and you have board wipes from black. So you can answer just about anything, and you have finally access to reanimation spells, and you're playing green. So that means that you have not only access to a lot of powerful, theoretical reanimation targets, or, kind of more mid-rangey type creatures that you might want to reanimate, but in addition, you also have access to mana dorks, which can feed what is probably the strongest reanimation target in cEDH, Razaketh. And that's, obviously a very, very powerful thing to have when you're playing Razaketh-based strategies, because, like we were talking about before, and as Morgan put it so eloquently, they're kind of like a triple threat. So yeah, you have a huge list of strengths, and what do you have as far as weaknesses go? Morgan, what do you think?
I mean, so obviously, like Breach and Dockside are insanely strong cards, and Breach, Dockside, and Wheel, and I guess probably Jeska's Will, that we'll be seeing more of, are some of the fastest combo enablers, or some of the cards that enable the fastest combo decks. So it's possible that Sultai is just sort of capped on, it will struggle to be the fastest sort of turbo, Nas consult type deck, though in my experience, Food Chain is actually pretty much as fast as the Turbo Nas. I goldfished an absurd number of games with Kazur and Akima, and was getting the turn 3 consistency was 70% with a solid number of turn 2s as well. Yeah, so it's slightly slower, and then playing creatures. I mean, obviously they're summoning sick, which is annoying, and it opens you up to people hating on creature strategies, but I think that's decently manageable, and you can always diversify. There's nothing in Sultai that precludes you from playing artifacts. If you're playing a fast-ish brew, playing a mix of artifacts and creatures for your mana means that you're somewhat diversified against people hating on one or the other.
Yeah. Very, very good points. I guess we could probably sum that up as, a lot of these Sultai type strategies tend to lend themselves better to, not necessarily like a grindy game, but a lot of their strengths are really maximized in a grindier game. That doesn't, mean that they can't go fast, just means that they can fall back on, being able to grind a lot more easily than some of the more all-in, color combinations. In addition, kind of like what I touched upon before, mana dorks, I think, just make your mulligans so much smoother in general. Sort of having, I would say, guaranteed turn 1 acceleration, like in a lot of your hands or the majority of your hands, leads to a lot of them being keepable, especially if your deck runs on really sort of thin margins and you don't need to explode into a ton of mana. I would say that definitely the case, in my opinion at least, the case against Sultai is overstated.
Yeah.
It's certainly
For
still
sure.
a very, very strong combination with an enormous list of pros. And realistically, like, if your only con is that your top speed is not as high as like another color combination, well, I mean, sure, that's like one axis of the game that's very important to look at.
How does it make the corners?
Yeah, exactly. but that's it, right? How does it corner? What's the handling like? There's so much. There's so many more aspects to EDH games and cEDH games that are not accounted for by merely looking at goldfishing and goldfish numbers.
I guess
another thing too, though, is, I mean, when we're looking at Grixis, and we're comparing Sultai and saying that it's not as explosive as the things that you can do with red, but a lot of the win cons that you have access to don't require being explosive because they're so efficient.
Right.
So we've a pretty good chance of having a turn 1 dork, which means that if we're still running Oracle plus Consult, then all we need is really 2 spells at that point to be able to pull off a win. We don't need to have access to Dockside Extortionist when really all you need is 3 mana to win, whether you're going through a food chain or whether you're doing a Neoform plus a Consult or something like that. So even though the ceiling for the amount of mana that you can expect to generate or the amount of cards that you can expect to see is not going to be on the same order, it's also not necessary. And I think that trying to compare the one type of game apparatus to another just in those terms leaves out some of the context of what is needed for those different style of gameplay to be able to do what they want to do.
Well, and one thing that I wanted to touch on too is because we were talking about how Sultai kind of folds to sort of these board wipes or too permanent oriented, too creature oriented. But when we're really talking about we're in the meta right now, like one of we're kind of moving into this. You're either on a fast deck or a rule of law deck to some degree, right? Deafening Silence is a card that a food chain deck just kind of shrugs its shoulders at and just kind of does its thing, right? Like, oh no, I can't cast non-creature spells. I guess I'll just make infinite mana and recast my creature commander. And that's Sultai has so many advantages that I think that and I kind of said this jokingly where it's how does it corner? I would say that these black red X decks are the Mustangs that are really good drag cars, right? Or they're really fast off the line. They have great top speed. But Sultai to me is something a lot more akin to like a rally car, if that makes sense, where it's going to go through the bumps of the road a lot more smoothly, and it's going to be able to deal with the corners of what's going on in the game much easier than something like, Jund or Mardu would do.
It's got great mileage, and it can support an entire family. You can fit a few kids in there as well as the dogs.
Slaps hood, you can fit so much.
Reliable storage.
I think that, sort of spitballing off of the point that you just made there, one of the things that, I've noticed playing Sultai versus Grixis, or, most notably color combinations without green, is that you much less frequently find yourself in the position of looking at your hand and going, I have no choice but to feed the crap out of this dockside.
Yeah.
I have no choice but to just, try and jam out this early win. This hand doesn't do anything else other than just go for it, is something that I experience way, way less playing Sultai than playing Grixis, which I've played a lot of, or even Jeskai, or any number of other color combinations. If you are going third and the player going first goes fish and the player going second goes fish, you're all right, well, I guess I'll play a dork on turn 1 and then my commander on turn 2, and I'll hold up 1 mana interaction. Maybe if these fish go away, I can launch this mystical tutor in the end step or whatever, and then we'll go from there once the game's a little bit more normal.
It gives you freedom to adjust your tempo.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of freedom. When you said cornering, it sort of made me think it doesn't. It's not exactly cornering, but it definitely transitions game plans much more smoothly than
pivoting
a lot
game
of
plans.
Yeah, pivot. Yeah, it's kind of like a corner, right? Changing directions, much more smoothly than Grixis or one of the other color combinations, particularly ones that don't include green.
Right. And you did just mention, Jeskai and, its lack of green. But it is a red deck, and it is a blue deck, but it doesn't have black. It's red, white, and blue. So, Spleen, when we're talking about Jeskai, and...
Oh, are we talking about Jeskai now?
Yes, we're transitioning.
Wait.
That
I have one more thing to say about Sultai, though.
Okay, go back.
Which is that I think it is one of the things that somewhat holds it back when people directly compare Grixis and Sultai, is that Grixis has, I guess, depending on who you ask, at least 2 extremely strong commanders options now. And I think that the ones in Sultai don't do a great job at differentiating themselves and justifying themselves over 4-color options.
Right.
Why would you play Thrasios X? Why would you play Thrasios Silas or whatever when you can play Thrasios Tymna or Thrasios Vial Smasher? Either one of those. Nadir has your food chain plan, but it was always very easy in Sultai playing one of the... Tasigur was probably the best Sultai commander for a very long time. It was very easy to just say, we'll just play Thrasios Tymna or Thrasios Vial Smasher, depending on which direction you want to take it. And then Kazur Nukima, it's we'll just play the first sliver. So, but, the thought of playing with, Inala in Sultai, oh my god. If you could just Neoform into Spellseeker and...
Oh, yeah.
Have creature tutors and dorks and all of this, I think that people's evaluations might shift if there were some really good Sultai commanders that justified themselves over 4-color archetypes.
So you're saying we should free Leovold then?
Absolutely not.
But you would attack the current meta so well.
Please no.
Yeah, and then we'd have the Leovold meta, and the best deck to attack the Leovold meta is Leovold. Doesn't that sound healthy?
It'll be Flash all over again, but somehow worse. So anyway, you ruined my seamless transition there, Morgan. I did such a good job of seamlessly moving that on.
The
And we were
essence
like,
of
"Wait, one
professionalism.
second." I know.
What really
but-
makes it seamless, though, is then when you go back and call me out for ruining the transition, right? That now we're like, there was a transition, and then we went back, and now we're transitioning again. Let me just plant a big flag here.
So, Morgan, what's your opinion of Jeskai?
Come on, I even gave you the flag feed in, historically called America. Jeez.
America.
Do I have to do all the work around here? So I think Jeskai is historically has been one of the weakest color combinations. I think for a long time, Sultai was good and Boros was bad. Was like the quick and dirty summary. Obviously now Red's getting tools, and I think Green hasn't got a ton in the last year. Like 2019 was very nice to Green. 2020 not so much.
I would say 2017 through like 2019, Green got big boosts.
Yeah.
2021 is going to be the year of white, probably. So
Cross your fingers.
But so Blue and Black are very strong. Everyone agrees on this. They have been very strong for a very long time. Green has been very strong. I think it's losing a little bit of ground. Red has gained a lot of ground. So Jeskai historically has had the weakest color, which is white, and really the second weakest color, which is red. Which means that a lot of the Jeskai decks that we've seen have been very heavily blue focused.
Right.
And it also didn't get good partners. You don't have Thrasios or Tymna, which means that there wasn't, like, those, particularly Tymna, was so strong that she encouraged development in notably Abzan and Mardu, where it was like, let's just see what sort of shells we can make, because Tymna does a lot of heavy lifting. So Jeskai decks also tend to be very commander reliant. Whether that the commander's your primary value piece with something like Elsha, or a combo piece, which is also true in Elsha, or like a better example of a combo piece would be Vadrok or Bralin and Shabraz. The commander, like, they've always been these very commander-focused decks, but it's pretty rough having 3-color commanders. They're difficult to accelerate into, like, without the fast mana needing to make 3 colors, right? Like, you can't play a Soul Ring and then play your 4-mana commander on turn 2, or something like that. Like, you're looking at playing at least 1 colored rock, and you don't have the dorks because you're not in green, so you don't have that level of consistent colored mana acceleration.
It runs into the same issue that, like, Mardu has, right? Where it's like, you kind of get left with this decision, okay, well, I guess I have to feed the fish in order to, like, play the game.
Yeah, exactly. But you don't have access to Black's tutors, which do a lot of smoothing in Mardu, where you can kind of play, you can play, maybe you put in some more disruptive elements that you can tutor for when you need them, or like you just find you build your deck like, I'm going to cast Ad Nauseam very fast every game. Like, setting aside the fact that blue doesn't have an equivalent card to Ad Nauseam, let's pretend that it did. You still couldn't cast it nearly as consistently.
Sure
on
it does.
turn
It has
3.
Enter the Infinite.
No, but like even
knowledge exploitation.
Yeah, sure. Or what's the recurring insight is the blue
Recurring
ad
insight,
nauseum.
yeah.
Like, you couldn't cast recurring insight even if it actually cost blue and 3 instead of blue and 4. You couldn't cast it on turn 3 nearly as frequently in Jeskai as you could cast ad nauseum on turn 3 in Mardu. And so you've been sort of forced into this commander-reliant, not super fast deck, which has given everyone a super obvious axis to hate you on, which is, I'm just not going to let you have your commander. And that's something that I like. If you look at historical Jeskai decks, it's like, oh, you're playing Elisha? Well, I'm just gonna, like, I'll tutor a mana drain, and I'll mana drain your Elisha. I'll get 5 mana on my turn, and, like, oh, you tapped a mana vault? Well, I guess you're out of the game for the next 3 turns. Or, like, playing Kikar, which I've done a lot of. Kikar eats, like, considering what Kikar does, Kikar eats an absurd amount of removal. Like, you know, people look at a board and there's like the Gitrug monster and Kikar, and they're like, Kikar's the problem. I'm like, really? So like that's always been an issue. And then the fact that you can somewhat hate on creatures is nice. But then you're really big at feeding docksides and fish, and like in 3 colors you could still try and run things like your non-basic hate, like your back to basics and Blood Moon. Like, you can support them, especially with builds being so heavily blue focused in Jeskai typically. But then you play a whole bunch of artifacts and a mana base with a ton of islands, and then you play Blood Moon, and then someone either gets a carpet or gets a dockside, and then like all your work is just negated at the drop of a hat. So the things that it offers you in terms of hate that other color combinations don't, like, it also feeds into the workarounds that most decks have for that kind of hate.
Well,
and somewhat
you don't have the black tutors to get the hate.
Yeah, you don't have the black tutors to get the hate, which means also you're spending, like, if you're, let's pretend you're just trying to combo with Scepter. Like, if you spend your Enlightened Tutor to get your Blood Moon, then yeah, you now don't have that Enlightened Tutor to get your Scepter. And that's like, maybe you're playing like Transmute Artifact, Whir of Invention, and then like Fabricate? Like, is that
Intuition?
That's like,
I mean, Reshape is like, I'm looking at the Elsha list right now, and like it runs like Enlightened Tutor, like you said. It also runs Savine Wreck, which is good. But Mystical Tutor, Reshape, Muddle the Mixture ends up being a tutor for you. Fabricate, Transmute Artifact, and that rounds it out. I mean, those are I guess
Intuition?
Gamble.
Yeah, Intuitions.
Yeah.
But yeah,
there it is.
Like, if you look at particularly not having green and the creature tutors, and then not having black and the regular tutors, spending a tutor to find some sort of interact or like proactive hate piece as opposed to some part of your win is always really rough. Like, it is not a good feeling, because you have maybe 10 or 8 passable tutors, and then you spend 1, and then you draw like 2 you draw like Mystical and Merchant Scroll, and you're like, okay, I guess now I have to Mystical for the Artifact tutor to find the Scepter, or Mystical for something to find Breach, or whatever it is. I think that, yeah, Jeskai's weaknesses, unfortunately, like, are, it's not just that they're, Jeskai's weaknesses also interact very negatively with its strengths. Like, they the things that exploit its weaknesses are also counters to its strengths in many ways. Right. Which leaves it worse than maybe it seems like it should be.
Well, and we had talked about, when we were talking about Mardu, about how white and red are like these, like, we were talking about how red is like this, it feels weird to call it a supplementary thing. In Jeskai, it really is. Because, I mean, Jeskai is, again, like I said, I'm looking at Elsha right now. We're talking 33 blue cards, 5 white cards, and 13 red cards. It is a mono blue deck for all intents and purposes. And that gets to run Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast in Final Fortune. In, I guess, Breach and extortionists, but who cares about those, right? But I mean, like, I will say this about Jeskai is I will say that I think it's gotten a little bit better than it was previously than Commander Legends, because now with Hull Breacher, they get to have a, what's it called? A Notion Thief plan without the Notion Thief. Which is definitely a big help to them, because now they get to use their wheels in a aggressive format, or for an aggressive way that they previously wouldn't have done.
I actually think that Jeskai is one of the colors least well positioned to take advantage of Hull Breacher, because unless you're like going deep and playing things like Recruiter, it's completely.
I mean, I don't disagree with you.
It's completely inaccessible as a card. Like,
But,
if we're
like-
looking at this Elsha list, you have, like, Intuition is not a Hull Breacher. Gamble is, like, a Hull Breacher a decent amount of the time, and then Hull Breacher is a Hull Breacher, and that's it. You're done.
Right. Cobble, I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts, because we've been Pongo, Spleen and I have really dominated the last couple of things. What are you thinking here on Jeskai?
So, when we were talking about Sultai and we were comparing it to Grixis, and how we were saying before that, Sultai is able to maybe, shift gears and pivot and, change the pace of the game when necessary in, the case, where Spleen was talking about, not feeding the dockside, or not feeding the fish that's at the table, being able to kind of change its tempo. I think that Jeskai is even worse at being able to adjust its tempo to what it is that's happening, what the changing landscape at the table is. I think that Jeskai lists tend to be very one-note, linear kind of game plans, and they all have, just because of the way that blue and red and white kind of come together, they're very similar game plans. You want to be, they all seem to fold to rule of law. Mm-hmm. They want to be extremely active, play a lot of non-creature spells, and they're like Spleen was saying, they're very oriented around the commander. So if you can keep the commander off the table, or if you can plant a rule of law, then their game is just done. And they have very poor access through their tutor suite to be able to get themselves out of those circumstances. So, if somebody Gilded Drakes your Elsha, how do you go and find your Gilded Drake to get it back? Or, how do you go and find the removal that you need to get it off the table and then recast it?
Ban Gilded Drake.
Right. It feels like their game plans are A, more vulnerable than the other color combinations, and B, less able to recover from somebody else exploiting those vulnerabilities. And I think that's why we have a somewhat underrepresentation of Jeskai in the metagame. Now, the commanders that we have are really interesting and fun commanders. Elsha and Kaikar are both, they're fun to play, but they also are really good at losing.
Yeah,
So,
that is
ouch.
absolutely true.
Ouch.
I'm just, I'm also looking at other lists that are on the database too. Like right now, I'm looking at the Vadrock list, and
that one I don't know a lot about. I don't have a lot of.
The gist of it is you land a Vadrock, you mutate it onto something. And then you play High Tide out of your graveyard or something.
No. So the key thing is, if you mutate on the combo is Dockside Vadrock and a bounce spell.
Right.
You mutate Vadrock onto your Dockside, you cast your bounce spell for free, you bounce the mutated Dockside Vadrock combo to your hand, repeat.
Right. So again, if you can take away the Vadrock, or if you can land a Rule of Law, or Heuristic Study or something like that, then you've made life extremely difficult for that player. It's I think confirming the one-noteness of the game plans that you see that open up in Jeskai, just as a consequence of what we have in that color pie.
And you'll notice it's a dockside centric combo. Like the Vadrok deck is so desperate for dockside that it's running both recruiters.
Right, I was gonna say, does it have both sides of the recruiters?
This like spell slingy, instant and sorcery, synergizing, like not play to the board at all deck that like realistically you probably might, or like you might want to consider putting Pyroclasms in. It's like, oh yeah, let me just cast this Imperial Recruiter because that's my option for finding this combo piece.
Hey, I mean, to be fair, it also gets Baron Master Wizard. It gets you there.
Yeah, but not both. Unless you're going to tutor Baron, bounce your Recruiter, play it again, get Dockside. Oh, baby.
I mean,
love me some 1, 2, 3, 4, 11, 13 mana combos.
Hey, like they say
It's
with,
like
what was it, Ryan?
Past.
What was it Ryan said when we were talking about Godo? Is if you can count to, what's the number? Count to 11?
Count to 11.
Yeah, you can get there. So, I mean, that's the same thing here, right?
10 fingers and my raging... What? That's how you know you're going off as Godo, right?
So, with this, we kind of, if we were to kind of put Jeskai alongside the other three that we've talked about, Pongo, we've talked about Abzan, we've talked about Sultai and Mardu, of those, which of these four so far, which one would you want to be on Jeskai before any of those?
So I guess what I would say about Jeskai in general is that, and this is probably more an observation about the format as a whole. Blue as a color is debatably the strongest, deepest color in the whole format. I don't think that's an especially hot take. Some people would disagree for the sole reason that they would say most likely that they think black is a stronger color.
Certainly blue is the deepest color.
Blue is certainly the deepest
color. I would never disagree with that. I'm part of the camp of people who actually thinks black is the best color. But.
Right. But we could talk about that as an entire episode. That is neither here nor there. So when I look at Jeskai, what I see obviously is, it has all of the tools it could possibly need. And if we compare it with some of the other color combinations that we looked at today, like Abzan, if we compare it even with Mardu, access to red gives you, a good amount of explosiveness and some really, really high impact, powerful cards. Blue gives you stack interaction, bounce spells, so you can answer pretty much anything. And then white also gives you that potential to answer all of the cards that we've talked about that would get in your way if you're playing Jeskai, rule of law effects, null rod type effects, etc., annoying hate bears. You just throw Swords to Plowshares at it. The problem is, and everybody touched upon this, is that we're playing 100 card singleton, and if you can't access these cards consistently, if you can't just play any card you'd like, but for 2 mana extra, essentially, it becomes much harder to enact your game plan consistently. So, to return to your question, Callahan, I would, and I think this is not going to come as a surprise to anybody, I would definitely be playing Sultai above any of the color combinations that we've talked about thus far. The reason being that, like I said, and like I've touched upon multiple times today, you have all the tools you could possibly need. You have the depth of blue, but most importantly, you also have access to all those cards, and you have access to them when you need them. And not only do you have access to your answers when you need them, but you also have access to your, specific threats when you need them. So I think that, more than anything, this is probably why we see certain dynamics, certain color combinations standing head and shoulders above the rest in cEDH.
So let me ask this, and I want to posit this to the table. So if you were given of all the red, white X decks, which are, if I'm correct, it's like Jeskai, as far as the ones we're talking about today, right? Between Jeskai and Mardu, Morgan, which one of those two would you rather be on?
It depends on who I'm playing with.
I mean, going into a blind meta, which one would you rather be on?
Jeskai. I need to trust the people I'm playing with if I'm not going to play blue.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think?
But I think just one of the other reasons about why, like, Jeskai maybe doesn't look great is that, you know, Pongo saying it has all the tools, and it sort of does, but it doesn't it doesn't offer something that, like, really makes me want to play it over Grixis.
Right.
Whereas,
so
Abzan does something different than like, you know. So even if I think Jeskai might be better than one of Abzan or Mardu, I'm not actually sure. I just, like, I look at a Jeskai deck and I'm like, but this doesn't justify running it versus running, like, Grixis. Like, why am I playing Kikar and not Kess? Right? Like, like, yeah, Kikar's funny. It's a bird wizard. But, you know, that joke only lasts a little bit. And then it's like, I get to play Savine's Reclamation for my intuition combos? Is that what white gets me over black here? Like,
yeah, I mean, that goes without saying, and I kind of touched upon that. I think another sort of major issue with Jeskai historically has just been, you know, even putting aside the problem of being able to tutor your win conditions, most of the win conditions that you actually have are not particularly good. I think that this has been remedied a little bit, you know, to some extent recently with the printing of Jeska, you know, coincidentally enough, you know, where now you can be playing sort of infinite mana combos and you have an outlet in the command zone for your infinite mana. So, you know, in theory, this is something that kind of gets rectified with the printing of new Jeskai commanders. You know, it might not just be a function of the color combination per se, but just, you know, the commanders that we currently have in addition. You know, I think if I was going to answer, Callahan, your question specifically, you know, Mardu versus Jeskai, you know, I kind of sympathize with what Morgan is saying, where, like, I don't know that I would necessarily trust other people if I'm playing Mardu, but at the same time, if I'm playing Mardu, I think, and, you know, it kind of like, if you understand kind of the philosophy of that wedge, then you probably understand this whole idea is, you know, you're kind of throwing caution to the wind to a large extent. You know, you're kind of like choosing to be the person who needs to be answered as opposed to the person who's going to be answering things. So, you know, from that perspective, you know, I do like to play my blue decks and I do like to play stack-based interaction, but I also like to be the one asking the question a lot of the time. So,
yeah,
you know,
if I was,
I think I would pick Mardu.
I would pick Mardu if I was recommending an unknown player what to play into an unknown meta. But me personally, I would want to be on Jeskai.
Okay. So then Cobble, you know, it kind of comes to you then, like, you're the tiebreak. Would you rather be on going into a blind meta? You know nothing about this meta. You're going into a tournament. Are you playing in your two options, or you can play Jeskai or Mardu? Which one are you picking?
I pick Mardu every day of the week.
Every day of the week.
Every day of the week.
Even Sundays.
Even Sundays, yes. Because, so, what black gets you in this case, I'm going to presume that if I'm on Mardu, we're talking about Tymna as one of the commanders, which means that you've got a lot of forgiveness for being disrupted. You've got a lot of forgiveness for maybe not getting off to the fastest start. Maybe your mulligans weren't as great. If you can, you know, just the card advantage that is baked into having your commander that you know that you most of the time will be able to get into play on turn 2, just that on its own is something that I'd rather have as a thing that I can depend on, rather than kind of the coin flip of, well, you know, do you get the right 7 or 6 or whatever to start off under Jeskai to get your game plan underway. And, you know, the thing with access to black is, all right, you're going to have the tutors to be able to go and get the very specific pieces that you want, either to counter what it is that's going on at the table or to go and perpetuate, you know, progress your own game plan. You also have speed with all the rituals that you have access to. With the combination of red and black with their explosivity is just huge. And that's not only going to give you faster starts to begin with, but also faster recovery times when somebody else upturns your game plan as well. So those all fit well into the style of play that I want to be playing. I've played, I've played Elsha. I've played a lot of decks that have had a Jeskai as the subset, in the colors that it had access to, and Jeskai was kind of like a big part of what those decks were doing. And for me personally, I want to have the determinism that you get from having black and from having Tymna. Okay. Those things are giving the reliability that I want to have when I'm going into a game.
So now,
and the way you guys, yes, you don't have access to blue, but I mean, you've got access to silence, you've got access to, Orum's Chant, you've got access to
Angel's Grace,
Red Elemental Blast, Pyroblast, Deflecting Swat. It's not a huge number of stack interaction spells, but
they are there.
They're there,
Ricochet
and they can be
trap.
Got them.
Okay, maybe not that one, but with some well-informed play, those I've seen people play mono white with stack interaction, and having enough knowledge about what's going on at the table to know when to fire off a silence on somebody else's upkeep or something like that can go a long way. Right. And I think it shouldn't be discounted that those things are tools that are available to Mardu. Yes, they're not going to be able to play the straight ahead, interact with what everybody's doing on the stack game that people can when they have access to blue, but they're not completely out of the game altogether. Right. There's a lot of things that they can still do.
So as we kind of come into the last bit of the episode here, as we kind of come to Temur, we've talked a lot about, we talked about black-green, we talked a lot about, black-white. Now we come to Temur, and Cobble, where is Temur? I know that like Thrasios Crom is something people have talked about. The deck, and I talked about this in our tier list video, the deck that I've really seen kind of pop onto the scene and be good is Paco. And so, what is it that...
Fight?
Paco's only good when people aren't playing Draneth Magistrate.
I have had the unfortunate experience of having to play Lavinia against Paco more than once, and it's a miserable time.
Okay, but I feel like that says more about Lavinia than it does about Paco.
Oh, man.
So anyway...
That wasn't even mean. That was just true.
Yeah. It hurts, doesn't it?
Where's the lie, though?
So, Cobblepott, where does Temur kind of lie within this conversation?
So Temur is in a weird place because it kind of straddles the desire to play a creature-oriented game plan and a spell-slinging game plan. And you could say that, well, it can kind of do either, but it either is way all in on the creature game plan, if you're looking at something like Animar, or it's something that is much less on the creature plan and wanting to be kind of more all in on the spell slinging, a la something like Paco or something like Calamax. I don't know enough about the Thrasios and Crown builds to be able to speak cogently as to what they want to do, but what the colors have access to seems to me like it's a little bit split in what the incentives are for you to be doing. So you don't have the black tutors, so it means that, well, you've got blues tutors are going to be giving you access to looking up your instants and sorceries, and your green tutors are going to be all about getting you creatures. So either you are, looking to perpetuate that spell slinging game plan, or you're looking to do something that's creature oriented. In either case, it's not going to be as fast as anything that has access to black, because you're not reliably going to be tutoring those things up, and you don't have the same ritual capacity that you do, because you don't have Culling the Weak and Cabal Ritual and Dark Ritual and so on and so forth. You do have all of the turn 1 mana dorks, which are allowed, they're going to give you better consistency for your mulligans, and kind of what we've said about all of the other color groupings that have access to green. This is kind of like the one color grouping that has red and blue, so it's got kind of like all of the stack based interaction along with green, but it doesn't. The way, so for instance, Jeskai points you in a direction very clearly. This is the way that you go with this color combination. There's not really that with Temur, and because it doesn't have that explosivity, it's not going to be as fast for getting onto the game plan as things that have black, and the types of games that it's going to be playing, it's not going to be running Tassa's Oracle and Consult. So
no, it's going to be on Seasons Past loops, right?
Well, I mean, so you look at the win cons that you see in Temur lists, and they are, I'll say, idiosyncratic, or they're not the typical kinds of win cons that you see that are used in the other color combinations, and they tend to be win cons that have a much higher startup cost. So if you're doing Conspicuous Snoop and Kiki Jiki, or Dualcaster Mage with Ghostly Flicker, these are 6 mana plus combinations that you need to get those off of the ground. You're not going to be hitting those in the first 2 or 3 turns of the game most of the time. And you might luck into getting enough mana to get one of those off the ground, but you don't have the tutor support to make it happen consistently. So it sits in this kind of weird place that, in my view, it doesn't really know, or doesn't have a real incentive to go in a particular direction.
Right. I
don't know. Who knows a lot about Thrasios and Crom and can speak substantively to the type of game that it wants to play?
Not I.
I know a decent amount about Thrasios and Crom. So that's definitely a deck that's had a lot of iterations. There's been several sort of anti-creature versions, like Thrasios survives Pyroclasms, and obviously Crom survives Pyroclasms. But I think those somewhat fell out of favor with the printing of Drannith Magistrate, because then Pyroclasms became a lot less good. First of all, people have been playing less dorks, and then the biggest thorn that was a creature had 3 toughness, so then it was like, okay, maybe focusing on Pyroclasms and keeping creatures off the board isn't great. And there was a period where we saw less Tymna. Tymna, I guess, is making a bit of a resurgence with Commander Legends, because she's one of the best things to pair random new partners with.
Right.
But so then it became sort of this. It was a little bit more anti-artifact. I know Looter Scooter had, I believe it was called a Dirtle Control, and I think it was eventually taken out, but to give you an idea, there at one point at least, there was in fact a Rurik Thar in that deck.
Oh wow!
I think that eventually got taken out. Yeah, it looks like it's.
But what would you, if you could, in a tweet, give an elevator pitch for what the archetype for the deck is? Like what does the deck want to be doing?
The deck wants to play control. Leveraging the fact that it has leveraging big mana from creatures, and the fact that it has 2 card advantage engines in the command zone.
Right. It's a Thrasios deck through and through.
Yeah, it's a Thrasios deck, and Crom actually fits very nicely in a Thrasios deck, because if you're trying, like, you're playing things like Priest of Titania, and you're like, this is going to tap, for a Thrasios activation. Well, guess what? That also makes your Crom pretty easy to cast. I think the win cons have always been a bit of an issue with that deck. Like, I'd love in it to be on, like, it seems to me, I look at the list, take out the win conditions from the deck, and then you go like, man, this deck really looks like it wants to be on Collector Roof and Null Rod and like, Meltdown. And then you're like, oh, but we're probably winning with Dockside. Awkward.
Right.
And I think that's, like, Temur has the tools to be anti-artifact, except then you have, like, your best win con is going to be Dockside, or, like, your best win cons are often going to involve Dockside, which is obviously a bit of a nombo with being anti-artifact as a general rule.
Right.
So I think that's, like, what possibly the biggest awkwardness with Temur.
Okay.
Here's the real best Temur deck, and nobody at me on this. This is definitive. This is non-disputable. Is Omnath Food Chain the best Temur deck?
How could this be the best Temur deck if it didn't even appear in our tier list video?
This is true.
So I think that
It's that good. We didn't need to say it.
Temur does definitely have some interesting commanders, though. First of all, one that wasn't really touched on, Thrasios Rogak, is, like, if you've ever wanted to play a polymorph deck, this is it. Because not obviously 0 mana commander, polymorph, obvious synergy. But the other thing is that 0 mana commander, Tidespout Tyrant, perhaps slightly less obvious synergy, which is that one of the big issues with polymorph decks is that when you're polymorphing into Tidespout Tyrant, which is the best thing you can polymorph into, you've always needed to have, like, two, like, either a 0-drop and a mana positive rock. Sometimes you could get away with, like, Crypt and something that costs 1, but you were really limited on, like, what exactly you needed to have with this Tidespout Tyrant to actually go infinite. But now with Rogak and Thrasios, you have super easy enabling on Mox Amber. Rogak himself is a 0-drop, which means that you can, like, just Soul Ring or just Soul Ring, just Mana Vault, just Mana Crypt. Those all just get there on their own. Assuming you have the mana to recast Rogak, which is 2 mana, which is really not that much. And then
you only need to do it one time.
Yeah, and then you're not playing creatures, so, like, Pyroclasms are very free in the deck. Or if you're worried about slightly bigger things, you can play, like, your Rolling Earthquakes or whatnot, and kill your Thrasios. That's really not an enormous deal a lot of the time. You have the
Are those also looking to do, like, Cloudstone Curio?
Well, no, because
a lot of times
you can't play Dockside, right? If you're on Polymorph.
And Curio doesn't bounce artifacts,
otherwise
it would be so broken.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, like, that is one somewhat unfortunate thing, is that would also, like, Dockside Rogak Curio is a nice combo, but you can't play Dockside if you're on Polymorph.
That makes sense.
The other thing that I think I actually think that is being slept on is Calamax. And so here's my weird convoluted reasoning. Feel free to at me on this one. Calamax is a 1-card combo with Court of Calling. Now, initially it was just a Kiki combo. You play Kiki, you could play Zealous Conscripts because it was the one that had the most utility, and you're casting Court for 5 anyways, and it's getting doubled. So it's no additional cost. Or you could play Corridor Monitor because it was the cheapest one. Or, you could play Pestermite because it had Flash, or whatever. But now, like, the thing about that combo is that Chord's an instant, But if you have to go to combat to win, Chord's basically not an instant.
Right.
And it also
Right.
it taps Calamax for free because it has Convoke. But with the printing of Coercive Recruiter, is that what the card's called? I believe it's called Coercive Recruiter. Yeah, Coercive Recruiter in Commander Legends, which is whenever Coercive Recruiter or another pirate enters the battlefield under your control, gain control of target creature until end of turn, untap that creature, gains haste, and becomes a pirate. The enormous thing about this is that instead of just making infinite copies of itself, it makes with Kiki, it makes infinite copies of itself and steals and infinitely untaps all the creatures on the board. Which means that if there's a Thrasios in play, you win. If there's like any sort of outlet, you can just win. If there's a dork, you're making infinite mana. And you can do this like on everyone's turn. You just take all the dorks, untap them all, make them make infinite mana, and then like if there's any sort of thing you can do to draw cards or whatever, it's much easier to turn that into a win at instant speed. Whereas before, you couldn't go off over top of somebody else's combo because you'd make infinite Zealous Conscripts and then be like, all right, well, these don't do anything because I can't attack you with them. And so I think that actually gives Calamax... Like, it was to the point that Court of Calling actually doesn't appear in many people's Calamax lists.
Wow.
But I think that with the printing of Coercive Recruiter, that's, like, very wrong. And, like, that actually gives the deck an enormous amount of reach. And you are in blue, so instants are at least somewhat accessible.
Yeah,
A little bit, yeah. You got your Mystical Tutor, right?
But I mean, you can tutor chain, like pretty
sure.
You have Spellseeker, which finds mystical. You have like Merchant Scroll if you want it. You can also set up things with like doubled intuitions are very, very good.
So I'm going to posit a question then, just to kind of wrap up this discussion a little bit. Is barring Sultai, right? Because I think we've all kind of established of these 5, Sultai is the best. Is that fair to assume we've all kind of landed there?
Of the wedges, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Sultai out of the picture. You have to decide between... You're going into a blind meta again. I'm going to posit the same question, but this time with everything except Sultai. Cobble, which one are you taking into a blind meta?
Man. It's a tough question between either Mardu or Abzan for me.
Okay.
I do like, for all the reasons that I illustrated before, I am a big fan of Mardu farm lists, and I like just the game plan that they have. That said, I also like stacks-oriented, grindy strategies, and as a former Corridor player, I'm very familiar with what Abzan has available to it. I mean, given the two, I think I do think that for me, I think Mardu still edges it out.
Okay,
and I think that's the one that I would choose.
Pongo, what do you think about it?
So if I'm going into it with the intention of maximizing my win rate, I'm probably bringing Mardu. The color combination I'm bringing, if I just kind of want to have fun and play the commander I'm most excited about playing, this may come as a surprise. Drumroll, please. Temur.
Okay.
And I would probably be playing Animar.
Oh. No.
Now, are you playing Harvest Animar, or are you doing Imperial Animar, or what's the configuration?
You play Imperial Recruiter in your Animar deck, but no, I'd be playing Weird Harvest as well. I don't see why you wouldn't personally. But no, mainly my reasoning why is that, and I think I touched upon this in the tier list video, I just love getting onto the board, and I love like slinging creatures as if they're spells. I think that Animar is kind of like flavorfully the most Temur commander you could almost imagine. He kind of takes like that like Simic side and almost merges it with the blue-red side by like kind of turning your creatures into like these spells that you're kind of like storming out with. So I don't know, that it's not a purely competitive perspective on the matter,
Right.
which is why I prefaced it by saying that I would certainly pick Mardu if I was trying to maximize my win rate.
So Spleen, your facial expressions there.
Well, I was just
you
gonna
have
say,
some thoughts.
I don't know. The most quintessentially, Jesus, for some reason I can't say that word. Quintessentially teamer commander has to be Riku, right?
So Riku was in the back of my mind.
I mean, it's not competitively playable, but quintessentially teamer, I feel like I have to go with Riku.
I mean, actually, by its definition, it is actually Sarkon or Soren. What's its name?
Sarkon?
Dragonclaw.
Surek, Dragon.
Surek.
Yeah.
Surek.
Right.
I mean, he is the most teamer of all the teamer commanders, technically speaking.
He punches bears.
Right.
Okay, but Riku is boring.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
Animar is
but
very
it's
spicy
definitely...
and cool.
Wait, but what about
And
Maelstrom
Riku
Warrior,
inhabits that
guys?
space of Riku definitely inhabits that space of being kind of split and not knowing whether it wants to be a spellslinger if it wants to be playing everything on the stack or if it wants to be doing a creature oriented strategy.
Right.
Kind of schizophrenic.
I've
in that
definitely
way.
been handled inappropriately by Riku. When I started playing Commander, Sylvan Primordial was legal, and one of my friends played Riku. So,
Oh Lord.
yeah, it was like
Yep, that'll do it.
basically, it was like either there were like three ways the game would go. Either he'd get Riku and Sylvan Primordial, he'd destroy all our lands, and we'd be like, "This is the worst," or he'd get Riku and not have Sylvan Primordial, and then it would be fine. But since we couldn't tell if he was going to get Sylvan Primordial before he got it, we were just like, "You're not having Riku. Like, just no." So then,
Right.
like, basically, he never had any fun, because if he had fun, we weren't going to have any fun. But anyways, I will now answer the actual question and say that I would pick Teamer. I'd probably play Calamax and either go over the top with instant speed win cons when people thought that instant speed win cons were banned in April, or one punch people and then play the opening to One Punch Man, because that combo will never not be funny. The combo is you attack with Calamax and have him not die, which is not hard. And then you cast Gravitic Punch, which is a sorcery that is target creature deals damage equal to its power to any target. Then you cast a copy spell. And since your Calamax is tapped, and Calamax copies the first instant you cast, that copies the copy spell, which targets the original. You repeat that infinitely to put infinite counters on Calamax, and then your last two copies of your copy spell copy the Gravitic Punch. You have one for each player.
Wow.
That's
I mean, technically it's 3 punches, but,
counts as one punch, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Have you gotten that to
3
go off in the wild?
consecutive
Once.
one punches.
I've played like 3 games on Calamax, though. The problem is I played too much webcam and not enough cockatrice, and it's just so much effort to assemble decks to play.
You know what? One thing I will say this about Calamax, and I'll say this, I genuinely think this. I feel like, at the very least, I mean, it's a deck that runs like 3 visits. It's a lot more affordable now than it was a month ago.
Yeah, 3 visits is not stupid money. It's
like $2.
Which is honestly still absurd, but less absurd than like 80 or whatever the heck it got to.
It is original printing. At this time is $137.
Oh my god!
Gosh.
And that is
Hasn't
a
gone
drop
down.
from where it was.
Okay.
It went down a little bit.
It went down a little bit, but like
Yeah, it didn't go down a lot.
Wizards,
Here, let
are
me
you
get
paying
MTGs.
attention?
Let me get MTG stocks here to get the actual look of it.
Yeah.
Just for just for the sake of
Pongo,
like actually.
Good point.
That's a whole different video. Portal 3
Wait,
Kingdoms.
but if it didn't collapse the price, does that mean that they could reprint
Shh, don't mention it.
Capture?
So
Tutor?
it actually spiked right around Double Masters, and then it's actually higher now than it was before Ikoria.
Right.
It's actually gone up in price, the original 3 visits. So it is actually trending upward, which is hilarious. So,
yeah.
But anyway, so that kind of wraps up our discussion on the Wedges side of the 3 color combinations. I keep wanting to say pairings. But that kind of wraps that up. Next week, we're going to be back. We're going to be talking about the shards next week. So make sure you check that out. Morgan, before we take off, where can people find you at?
They can find me. I'm a part of Team Turn 3 with Pongo, where we stream cEDH usually Sunday evenings at 7 Eastern at twitch.tv/TeamTurn3. Or I'm part of the Into the North podcast, which can be found on YouTube as well as wherever you get your podcasts, at Into the North, or the Into the North podcast, or on Twitter at Into the North Pod.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today, and thank you for listening. And like I said at the beginning of the video, episode, I suppose, make sure to check out our Patreon. And like I said, we got a couple different tiers in there. One is they both get you access to our Discord server, where you can talk with Spleenface in there, and Cobblepott, and me, and Pongo, and Phoenix, and everybody else. So with that, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.